The Locked On Podcast Network presents the College Sports Big 3 in 30. The three biggest stories in college sports. From our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story. Why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The College Sports Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in college sports.
I'll be honest with you up front. I do not believe that Michigan is going to beat Ohio State, but it is not impossible for Michigan to do so.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines.
And hearing some things from Wink Martindale and Kirk Campbell even Kirk Campbell, give me a little bit of, I guess, hope going into the shoe. Because certainly no one thought I was on this very show, not in this very room, but on this very camera, probably with this very lens, telling you back in, I would say, 2 years and 3 days ago ish, that I had no belief that without a healthy Blake Corum, Michigan was going to be able to beat Ohio State. And they ended up beating him worse than they did in 2021, right? But then at that time, we knew that obviously Michigan had some offensive pieces and obviously was stout defensively under Jesse Minter, that it stood to reason that Michigan had a very strong possibility. This is not that, right? So I'm not trying to say, and that's why I lead off saying I don't expect him to win because, there's going to be these select Buckeyes who love to cut parts of my show out and post them online and be like, look at the dumb thing this idiot said, right? Like, okay, well, watch the rest of it. What did I say? But some of the quotes from the Inside Michigan Football, apologies there. Some parts of Inside Michigan Football, there were some things that were being said that I thought were enlightening. Now, certainly part of it is the fact that Wink Martindale is not going into this game with the, I'm an NFL guy. I mean, good luck, Chip Kelly and Ryan Day, but I'm just so far ahead of y'all. He's not going into that. It actually, and this isn't a good example, and this is also because I've been watching I've been playing Star Wars Outlaws a little bit lately, and I've thus been watching a little bit of kind of going through some of the Star Wars, and I put on, as I was going to bed the other night, The Rise of Skywalker, and so I read this in the same tone. Kylo Ren asks Emperor Palpatine, "What can you give me?" Wink Martindale responds, "Everything." But okay, here's what he said about what worries him about Ohio State. Everything. I mean, seriously, they're just a machine right now offensively, and we know that it's going to be a physical game. To me, that's advantage us in the physicality area. But we have done a great job of patching together a secondary essentially all season, and it's going to be a test because you've got to have some premier guys to go against premier guys, and it's going to be a great, great challenge for us. Right before that, he said, I was really glad to see Amir Hall step up in the Northwestern game, but this game we have coming up, so completely different animal. You know it. They got 3 werewolves out there that we got to try to cover, and it's going to be a great challenge for us. Well, as we've talked about the last few days, it all starts up front. If Ohio State has had a patchwork offensive line, Indiana did a really good job for a time being able to work through that line, but it didn't end up paying much dividends overall. Same thing could be said for a lot of teams. Northwestern for a half. I'd say more like a quarter. Kind of dominated up front, and then Ohio State kind of started to assert itself. You look at Oregon, who pretty much asserted itself all game. Michigan's not on the level. I mean, it's on the level with Northwestern from an offensive standpoint, but the other two offenses, of course, it's not. But it just needs to be able to have enough, right? That's kind of the problem that we sometimes have when we look at games like this, is we compare the statistics, and chances are that's going to give us a pretty accurate idea of how the game is going to go. Yes. But at the same time, it is, what if the game plan works out? What if they, everything kind of built to this? How much did Michigan kind of store up for this game? How much of the in-season stuff or the preseason, in-season stuff prepare them for this moment? That brings me to Kirk Campbell. And for some reason, it just kicked me out entirely of where I wanted to be. There we go. Kirk Campbell said something that really interested me. It piqued my interest. And I know we don't have a lot of trust and faith in Kirk Campbell. But he says about Ohio State, let me get to the most part. In 22, they were really, really aggressive. Last year, they were really back. He's talking about what they did as far as the box is concerned, right? 2022, they really tried to load the box. Last year, they tried to play some more, cover two. I'm not really sure because I wasn't exactly paying attention to like their actual coverages, but they weren't loading the box as much and backing those safeties and linebackers out a little bit. This year, they're back to the middle. They're not as aggressive, not as calm. So they're trying to get kind of a little bit more aggressive and dynamic, but not as much as they were in 22, where they could let up the huge play. So as he's saying, they're not going to play cover zero. Okay. And this continues. This is where this piqued my interest. We're going to end up discussing this on the other end, but let me get to this first. Going to the game plan, we've studied them 365 days a year. We watch them. The GAs, the analysts always break them down, so we have a good feel of what they're going to do and how they want to do it. So we meticulously put plays in the game plan throughout the season to try to play off them for when we play them. So it's going to be a part of what we do, part of what they don't think we can do, and what we're going to be able to execute really well that we've had in our back pocket for a while. I mean, that's the dream quote, because that's not the quote we've been getting generally from, Sharon last year going into the last 2 years going into the game. It's kind of like, oh, we're going to do what we do, and they have to try to stop us. Jim Harbaugh would say, like, they're a really good team, but, they're going to be really hard to beat, but we're going to be really hard to beat too. So to kind of acknowledge that, like, we've got a little something. That, and coming from Kirk Campbell, again, like I said, I know we don't have the trust and faith in it piques my interest a little bit. What do you know that we don't know, Kirk Campbell? Because that's clearly suggesting that.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. You could take an early look at some Thanksgiving football lines. The Lions are massive favorites in their first game of the day against the Bears. FanDuel has Detroit laying 10.5. I kind of like the Bears. Is that weird? FanDuel also doesn't feel like Caleb Williams and company will put up a lot of points. The Bears total over-under set at 18.5. I might take the over and the Bears to cover. I bet I can get some nice plus odds on that. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
The most important position matchup in this Clemson-South Carolina game overwhelmingly favors South Carolina.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
But the one matchup that is clearly the most important matchup of this game, and it really is one of the most important matchups that South Carolina has whenever they step onto the field. It is the opponent's offensive line versus South Carolina's front four. And you could say front seven a lot of times too if you want, whatever. I'm going to say front four. And here's the thing, guys. We know what this South Carolina defense is capable of. We know what they've been able to do on the back end and the front seven, but especially up front. And being able to get after the quarterback and provide all these pressures. You're ranked third right now. Third right now in the country in sacks, total sacks this year throughout 11 games. Now, let's put that in perspective, right? You talk about last year. Last year, this is a program that had 21 total sacks. It was 105th in the country, tied with Georgia Tech. You go to Georgia Tech, get a kid out of the portal from there, Kyle Kennard, been phenomenal. You almost double your output this year. Here's the thing that I think people don't understand about Clemson, and this is the matchup I think it's most important, and I think it overwhelmingly favors South Carolina. And I'm going to get into a bit of the history as well, so it might not – some people might wonder why, I don't know if that really matters as much. It does. It does. I want to set a few parameters here. Clemson is one of the best programs in the country over the last 15 years. Fair. There's very few programs that would trade spots or that wouldn't trade spots with Clemson based off of what, like, they won 2 national championships. They were able to beat Bama. Everyone knows that 2018 team, all these first-round draft picks, all that stuff. Matt Luke is their offensive line coach, and I love Matt Luke so much. Phenomenal interview, great dude. Come on, Matt Luke, former head coach, Ole Miss football. For those of you that don't know, that is a spot-on Matt Luke impression. I really like Matt Luke. I think he's going to do a great job there. Here's the thing. If there is a position that has ever been less of a focus and underutilized and grossly overlooked by Dabo Swinney and his staff, it's the offensive line. It's bad. It's bad. Like, this is a program that you look at all the 5 stars that they have brought in, all of the kids they have put into the NFL, all the first rounders, and we'll get into the numbers here in a second. You don't see it at this position, like at all. Offensive line, and let's start with this year's offensive line for Clemson has given up 18 sacks. That's 5th best in the ACC. I would venture to say they haven't faced anything close to what they are going to face this upcoming weekend, right? I think that's probably a fair assessment. In terms of tackles for loss, they've given up 60. That ranks 8th best in the ACC. Now let's look at the national, like where that lands nationally. Okay, 18 sacks allowed. You're sitting there right at 52nd in the country. That's on par with Alabama's giving up 18. Not really any other Power 4 teams or Power 5 teams that are around there. A&M's giving up 20. You're right around there, okay? Look at tackles for loss allowed. We talked about how many total they've given up. They've given up 60. That ranks 68. So you are outside of the top 50 nationally in both of those. And again, I will guarantee you, they have not faced anything close to what they have faced or what they will face on Saturday. They just haven't. I mean, you got some straight up effing assassins coming in there off the edge. And I'm not talking about just because of the way they do their celebrations. Dylan Stewart, Kyle Kennard off the edge. Boogie Huntley, Tonka Hemingway, Sanders, everybody in the middle. I'm getting pumped already. Here's the thing. This Clemson offensive line has some guys that were decent recruits and whatever. But that has never been a focal point of building a roster or building a team for Dabo Swinney. And it's one of the other many reasons you are seeing the downfall of him and his program right now. And that may sound dramatic. It may sound over the top or whatever. It's not. It's not. I joke with you guys all the time. That may sound dramatic. Well, I am dramatic, so I'm going to say it. It's not. Let's get into the numbers of this. So you look at like I'll bring up the last 5 years, right? Clemson signed 1 5-star offensive lineman. He starts at left tackle for him. They signed a total of 4, 7, so that's 11, 13. Sorry, guys, it's bad radio. 23 offensive linemen. 23 total offensive linemen. 10 of them, right? That's right. Hold on, I'm off. They've signed 19 offensive linemen. 19. 10 of them, half of them are 4 stars or better. And listen, that might not sound like that's not a big deal. Okay? You've signed as many 4-star offensive linemen as you have 3-star offensive linemen at Clemson. What's happened over time is a lot of those 3 stars are the ones that are starting, right? And the development of those guys is what's even sadder to watch because it's one thing to have more. They probably have recruited the offensive line better than South Carolina. We're not comparing South Carolina to Clemson at the offensive line because Clemson doesn't have a defensive line that's as good as South Carolina's. Okay? Like, it's going to be good, and this offensive line for South Carolina is going to have to hold their own, and they've been playing a lot better. But here's what I keep going back to. You look at how you looked against Alabama. Look how you looked against LSU. Look how you looked against Ole Miss. I mean, A&M. Those are teams that have 5 stars and 4 stars and top 100 and top 247 and top 300, whatever metric you want to go by. They've got elite recruits and blue chip talent all over their offensive line, and you ran through them like blank through a tin horn, as Nick Saban would say. Like, this is a defensive line that has whoever has been in front of them has not stood a chance. They have not stood a chance. And, not only do I think that continues, because of course I think it continues, but you look at like the way the season's gone, all right? They've had the least amount of production of their last however many games, which is Texas A&M, Vanderbilt, Missouri, and then Wofford. They've had a total of 11 sacks in the last 4 games. Not as great as the start they were off to. Whatever you were talking about, getting like 9 against Oklahoma, 4 against Bama. They were averaging around 4, it seemed like, per game there for a while. Here's the deal. Vanderbilt is a team that runs the ball a lot. Missouri ran the ball a ton in that game. I think they had like 30 rushes from the running back alone or something. It was crazy. And Brady Cook. Clemson's going to have to throw the ball to beat you. They're going to have to throw the ball to beat you. When you look at the emphasis that this roster has had placed on it from Dabo Swinney, these are the actual numbers. And I gave you the recruits. Let's talk about the development again. You've been at Clemson for 15 years. 15 draft classes have come through Clemson since Dabo Swinney's been the head coach. He's had 83 total draft picks, 18 first rounders, 30 first and second rounders. Of the 83 total NFL draft picks that Dabo Swinney has had, only 6 have been offensive linemen. Only 6. Only one has gone in the first 2 rounds of an NFL draft. That was Jackson Carman in 2021. You've had 6 total offensive linemen drafted at Clemson since 2009. 6 out of 83. Let's do the math on that real quick. That is 1 out of like every 14. I think that's around what, like 0.68, 0.6, like 0.69, 0.7. Like that's so bad. It's like 7% of your players. I think that's right. My main point here is when you talk about, or it's like 9%. I don't know. I should have just brought the calculator out. My main point is, you can sit here and say, well, you know what? Like they have like good recruits that are there now. They've done a better job. I do like Matt Luke. I think they've gotten better up there. Blah, blah, blah. My point is, this is a position that has never been a focus for Dabo Swinney. It has never been a focus for Dabo. He has not cared about bringing in elite talent there. He has not cared about developing elite talent there. And on Saturday, that position unit that he has had the least amount of focus or care or emphasis on since he's been at Clemson is going to be the one that has the most important role on the field. I just don't believe that in 15 years, you've had a program with this level of elite capability and getting to national championships and winning national championships and dominating the ACC and all those things. Go nationally and get whoever you want for 5-star players and all these recruits. How have you been so bad at getting elite offensive linemen to come in? And how have you somehow been even worse at making them not only elite, but developing them into being NFL draft picks? Not even elite NFL draft picks, just draft picks. 6 total. Again, this is a program that wants to be compared to Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia. Give me another one here, guys. Maybe you could say Oregon, LSU. These elite programs that seem to always be at the top, like near the top at least. I guess you could say Michigan. I mean, how do you the games are won and lost in the trenches? We say it all the time. And it's something that Dabo Swinney could care less about. It's a huge deal, in my opinion. I think it's a huge deal. And I think it's going to rear its ugly head on Saturday.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. You could take an early look at some Thanksgiving football lines. The Lions are massive favorites in their first game of the day against the Bears. FanDuel has Detroit laying 10.5. Kind of like the Bears. Is that weird? FanDuel also doesn't feel like Caleb Williams and company will put up a lot of points. The Bears total over-under set at 18.5. I might take the over and the Bears to cover. I bet I can get some nice plus odds on that. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
We've waited 13 long years for this since Texas A&M ran to the SEC.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
One of the biggest football games of the season. Still a lot to play for the Texas A&M Aggies and a lot to play for the Texas Longhorns. SEC championship implications, college football playoff implications. The entire world will have their eyes on Texas A&M on Saturday night. 118 matchups between these two storied programs, and they played every year from 1915 to 2011. Then, of course, Texas A&M, like Texas fans like to say, ran to the SEC, and now Texas has followed them to the SEC, and they play once again on Saturday night. Before we get into the football matchup, Andrew, I want to ask you, how old were you? Where were you the last time that these two teams played in November 2011?
I was 11. So I was not very old, which is why I think like a lot of our players for A&M and for Texas, I'm learning about this rivalry. Obviously, I watched it. I enjoyed it. I understood it. But when you're 11, you don't quite get it. Same, I think, as like I said, the players for both teams. So this is just going to be it's going to be a real awakening for some of these players and people like myself who have been fans for a while now, but haven't quite seen it as adults. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah, I don't think it'll take long if the players haven't already grasped how big of a matchup this is or how big the rivalry is, or if they can't feel it yet. As we record this on Tuesday morning, I think certainly by the time the game comes or when you run in that stadium and you just see, all of those Texas and all of those Texas A&M fans just rocking in Kyle Field, you'll certainly get a sense very early on of how much this game means to so many people in the Lone Star State. In November 2011, I was 18 years old, right? I had took a semester off. I had graduated high school in May of 2011, and then I went to basic training in AIT for the Army Reserves, and so I was back home waiting to go to college. So I was 18 years old. I'm now 31, with a bachelor's and a master's. At that time, I hadn't even started college. So it's just been so long since these two teams have played. You talk about it all the time, that in the last matchup, Justin Tucker kicks the game-winning field goal, and he's gone on to have a Hall of Fame career in the National Football League since then, right? So long time between these two teams, but I don't think the passion in the rivalry has dipped at all. I get on Twitter every day. I've gotten on Twitter every day for years, and you see Texas fans and Texas A&M fans just arguing back and forth with no football played, right? I know they played in basketball. I know they played in baseball, but we know football will determine this rivalry. And there's been a lot of hate there for years, even without Texas and Texas A&M playing. How do A&M fans feel going into this rivalry game on Saturday against Texas?
Well, before I answer that, I think the funniest thing, my kind of welcome to this rivalry is when I started Locked On Aggies, about a year and a half ago, before Texas was even in the SEC. And I look at, in comments and I'm like, what are all these Texas fans doing here? We didn't even play you. And I'm like, well, there you go. You know what I mean? I just found that so funny. Like, here's these Texas fans. Now it makes more sense. But I was like, I get 7 comments a day from Texas fans and we don't even play them. But so I always found that hilarious, and it kind of tells you what you need to know about this rivalry. But heading into this game, like you said in previewing this, there's a lot to play for both of these teams. Texas A&M is still alive thanks to Oklahoma and Alabama in that game. They're still alive despite the losses to South Carolina and Auburn to make the SEC championship game. You're a win away against your biggest rival at home. I think that the vibes are high, which you'd be surprised the way you lost to Auburn. The vibes are high right now because this team and this staff and these fans know that this team is still playing for something. In year one under Elko, you're still playing for something. In Thanksgiving weekend, you're playing important football. And I don't think a lot of people would have expected that out of this Texas A&M fans. So there's a lot of excitement heading into this game. And I think Texas A&M fans really believe they can win this one.
Yeah, no, I think Texas A&M fans are excited. Thankfully, you still have something to play for because you look at it going into Saturday. Texas takes care of business against Kentucky. If Texas A&M takes care of business against Auburn, you set up one of the biggest games in this rivalry's history. You set up a winner gets into the SEC championship scenario. I mean, just flat out, right? Whoever wins that game on Saturday night will be there. And then what I like to say is in typical Aggie fashion, right? Whenever you start to believe in Texas A&M, whenever you start to hype them up, whenever you start to give them credit, whenever you think they've gotten over the hump, then you lose to Auburn in 4 overtimes. You drop the ball, literally. You drop the ball in the end zone when you have a chance to keep the game going. What happened against Auburn and what gives you faith that this team can turn it around against a different beast, the Texas Longhorns, this Saturday? When you now lost, and I want to mention this, you've lost your last 2 conference games, right? After, I think starting off 5-0, you've lost to South Carolina and now lost to Auburn your last 2 conference games. So what gives you confidence? What happened against Auburn and what gives you confidence that you can turn it around against Texas?
Looking at against Auburn, it's always scary when you hear the name Peyton Thorne and kicked your behind. When those 2 things come into one sentence, you've done something wrong. And that's what happened. I mean, Peyton Thorne, receivers were wide open. I mean, one of the touchdowns of Cam Coleman, I could have thrown and caught, and that's a dead serious statement. I mean, like the secondary just vanished. Auburn just threw the ball all over Texas A&M. So when you ask what gives me confidence about this game, I'll tell you this. Looking at the way the season's gone, A&M is not, and it's weird because Jimbo Fisher's gone, but they have not played great on the road. They dominated Florida kind of before Lagway dialed in. I'd be a lot more scared about that game if you played Florida, now. You dominate Florida on the road. You kind of look against Mississippi State, sneak out with a win, and then lose to South Carolina and Auburn. But you've been, aside from that Notre Dame game where Connor Rigman was your starter and he was, just putrid, you have been really good at home. I mean, you've beaten LSU. You've beaten Missouri. You've beaten 2 solid football teams at home in great environments. There's one thing, and once again, I was in Austin last weekend. It was my first time in Austin, and you can't take anything away from the atmosphere there. Incredible atmosphere at that Kentucky game, I thought. But, the atmosphere at Kyle Field is going to be electric. Electric. It's going to be awesome. That's what gives me, I'd say, confidence. I'll probably predict Texas to win this game. I'll be honest with you. I probably will when we get to that here in a little bit. But Texas A&M could win this game in front of this elite crowd. I think you can't say otherwise.
Yeah, I do have to remind you and the fans that the 12th man, as great as they are, they can't actually play on the field, right? You still got to line up 11 against 11. So we'll certainly see, what happens. I want to go ahead and get into the break and then come back. Actually, you know what? Before we get to the break, we can talk about this before we get to the break. Texas A&M, right? I believe Trey Zoon the third. Is it Zoon? How do you say his name?
Yeah, Trey
He's
Zoon.
put some bulletin board material out there for the Texas Longhorns. And I don't normally, or necessarily believe in bulletin board material. I feel like this is the type of game where you're going to get up for it regardless, right? Yes. Texas A&M, if you need to hear some comments in the media to turn up for this game, then you're not ready for this matchup, right? But he's come out and he said some things about Anthony Hill, right? Anthony Hill's a great player, but he's not anything we haven't seen before, right? He's not anything we haven't dealt with, basically minimizing Anthony Hill, one of the best players in the country. And then he talked about the atmosphere that you talked about. He feels bad for Texas, right, and their players because they may not be ready for an environment like this. What are your thoughts? Do you like it, love it, or hate it that Trey Zoon has decided to come out and essentially poke the bear against the Texas Longhorns going into this matchup on Saturday?
I've always been anti that personally. And to me, there's two schools of thought to this, and it kind of depends on the type of athlete you are, competitor you are. I've always been in my playing career in sports. I was always I'm just gonna go out there and play. I'm not gonna say anything. Obviously, I'm not in front of media. That was you know what I mean. Like it's not like the same thing, but that's just how I took advantage of when I played sports. I just don't think you do that. You don't want to give another team the extra motivation. I agree with you. It's probably not really needed in this game, the bulletin board material, but it's now there. And some people are going to say, oh, come on, man. We love trash talk. And I'm all for it. I'm not saying I hate it. I just don't think that there's a reason to poke the bear. Go out there, respect your opponent, and show them on the field. That's kind of been my take on this. But I get the folks that say, heck yeah, it's a rivalry. We hate you. You hate us. Let's talk crap. I get both sides of it. But I personally am pro kind of staying away from it.
Yeah, I'm not advocating that Texas does it, but I do think in a game like this, like, why not lean into it, right? Best case scenario, you look like a genius. Worst case scenario, you lost, and then people just poke a little bit more fun at you, but they were already going to do that if you lost anyway. To me, these two teams hate each other, right? Yeah. You should. The fan bases hate each other. Go out there and talk a little bit of mess, right? The worst thing that can happen is you lose the game, and then they say, ha, 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 you were talking, and you lost the game. But I'm, a fan of, especially in games like this. Now, if it was Texas, Kentucky, or Texas, Florida, it's like just go out there and play. Texas A&M, lean into it. I'm all for it.